talked about ahimsa. Ahimsa, we talked about physical ahimsa. Then we talked about through speech. And now, today we do a little bit of this mental ahimsa. Okay? Actually, what you have to understand is the fact that before you verbalize it, it's already there or not in your mind. Before you act, is it there in your mind or not?
Yeah, yes.
Right? So therefore, it all actually begins here first, and then it starts manifesting in form of speech. It starts manifesting in form of physical actions, and So this actually is the origin. The mind is the origin. That's where all the data gets processed, and then it actually starts coming out in different ways. Now, one thing which is an extremely important thing to do, which my teacher told me many years ago, which I think is so useful, is to distinguish between a passing thought and a mental action. Very important. Okay? A passing thought is, for example, somebody hit me and I feel this person is so bad. And that's just a passing thought. Right? And that actually is not considered a mental action for which you are responsible. Because you know what? You don't have a total control over what you think. If I ask you, what are you going to think? What is going to be your thought 5 minutes from now? Will you be able to tell me? You don't know. Right? Then okay, not 5 minutes from now, but 3 minutes from now. Even that you don't know. What is going to be your next thought? Until it comes, you don't know. You'll be surprised. What is your next thought? Right? So therefore, there is a passing thought. That mental action. Action means you are making a choice. This passing thought is choiceless. Involuntary. For something which is involuntary, you are not responsible. Right? But if that thought comes and through your own you give a form to that thought. You keep on dwelling on that thought. You keep giving that thought a reality, then it becomes mental action. Right? So passing thought is not a problem. Sometimes any kind of thought is going to come. If you're obsessed with having always a good thinking mind, you will be disappointed. You will be disappointed and you'll be so obsessed over something that you have no control over. But a passing thought, as I told you, lasts for how long? 30 seconds. If you don't give it a strength, what will happen? It will go. So it goes. Right? So therefore, himsa is what? That passing thought, okay, I don't like this person, but then I dwell on it and I give it one whole big shape. Then you have used your free will to do what? Give it a much deeper foundation and not make it just a passing thought. Then you are responsible. So that means passing thought has to be distinguished from mental action. Any action is deliberate, subject to choice. You always have a choice to let that thought pass without giving it the strength. But when you use your free will to give it a strength and dwell on it and shape it and brood over it, which then ultimately results into your verbal actions or your physical actions, then you are responsible. Then you are responsible for all three. The physical, the verbal and the mental. Okay? So therefore, mental himsa, it actually all starts here. And how does it start here? I want to give you a little bit of insight into how the mind works. Right? Up to now, in the morning class, I talked about 4 functions of the mind. Right? One is the emotion, the other one is intellect, the third one is memory, and the fourth one is that I sense, ahankara. Now, I want to add one more element. The one more element is the memory that you have is, one thing is your conscious memory and the other is the unconscious memory. Right? The unconscious memory is something which, as I told you, that a child, I'll give you an example, which is, I think any psychologist will be very easily able to detect what I'm talking about, is that let's say when a child comes from a family where the father is abusing the mother, for example. Right? What happens as a child? What do you think goes on in the mind of a child?
It's okay. It's okay.
Insecure.
That's right.
Actually, the first reaction that the child has is traumatized.
The world is a scary place.
Exactly. Actually, the child has that capability of recognizing.
Fear.
It actually initially is terrorized.
Yeah.
That is the natural reaction. It's terrorized by seeing that. Cannot handle it. Okay? But now the child has to survive. So the human brain also has what? Survival mechanisms. That's when, sorry, coping mechanisms. Exactly. Coping mechanisms. So therefore, the child has to tell a story which will enable the child to cope with it. So what is the story that the child says? Different stories. Not everybody says everybody the same story. One story could be what? It's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Because my parents can do no wrong. That's one story. The second story could be what? I hate my father for doing this to my mother. I hate my father. So much anger people carry towards sometimes, But they can't verbalize. As a kid, you can't verbalize. So over a period of time, if you don't take care of that orientation that I hate my father, then what? You carry that forward, and every male experience that you have
Identifies with
the father. And therefore it turns sour. And when it begins to turn sour, then you add one more conclusion: all men are horrible.
hopeless.
Okay? So therefore, you go on building the story. Now in this case, what happens? You just make one person the enemy. And sometimes what actually can happen is, even though you hated your father for doing this, when you get married, you end up following the same pattern as your father. That is amazing.
Learned behavior.
Huh?
Because it's learned behavior.
It's learned behavior. It's actually in the unconscious, it is all learned. And it's what the very thing that you hated as a child, you end up doing to your own spouse. Okay? So therefore, this is how the unconscious works. The third message could be that my parents can do no wrong, I am responsible. You take on a lot of responsibility for something that you have not done. You keep on feeling that something is wrong with me, and that's why my parents are fighting. Okay? So therefore, different types of one distortion, right? A child is unable to handle, it all gets saved in what we call the unconscious memory. And that unconscious memory is not a rational mind. And when it is not dealt with, it stays there and it keeps on interfering. Either I keep on then as a result blaming myself the rest of my life, not knowing why am I blaming myself. Actually that is the cause. The second thing is I may end up repeating exactly the same pattern as what my father did. The third pattern could be I start hating all men. All these things happen because of the initial events and human mind's incapability of dealing with it, and because of inability to deal with it, it gets stored in unconscious. And when it is not decoded, when it is not understood, it keeps coming out in all these different ways. And you don't even know that it is coming out. When you interact, you only feel what? The other person. The men are bad. You're convinced. Okay, so therefore, all these unconscious things which are lying there, which at times, very nice human beings, many times people tell me, oh, my spouse is really nice, but when he gets angry, he goes mad. And then they start telling me long story about all the horrible things that person does. So that means, basically, when he's nice, where is he operating from?
Conscious mind.
Conscious mind. When he freaks out and does all kinds of crazy things, the unconscious mind takes over.
But it can be a
Conscious decision.
way out and blaming it on something
Yeah.
because the person is not ready to own up the responsibility.
Absolutely. This is what I'm saying. Until the time, so that means this is what happens until the time the person decides to own up. Until the time. Right? At any given point in time, you can spend your lifetime thinking what this, or even blaming yourself. Right? But if you begin to say, oh my God, my behaviors are all very distorted, something tells you. And if you begin to pay attention to it, and if you own up to it,
Take ownership.
you can actually release yourself. You can actually understand your behavioral patterns, and you can release yourself from this entanglement. Okay? So therefore, if you do not release and if you don't take the ownership, then what happens is, who do you unload all your unconscious, just any person on the street? Generally the people who are closest to you. Right? So therefore, ironically, people that we are closest to, we end up hurting the most. Himself. And a lot of times we love them, but even though we love them, we ending up hurting them the most. So therefore, if you really want to follow, because actually if you really love somebody, unless you have a completely mad mind, you want to do good only, right? Nobody wants to be bad to anybody, generally. Okay? But it's the unconscious mind takes over which you have no control. That is what happens. Okay? So therefore, that's why they say the first few years of marriage is a time that each one unloads everything that they have been holding on to the other. The whole baggage gets unloaded, because in front of that person now what? There is a committed relationship. There is a closeness. And there it's a place where you feel safe. And when you feel safe, this is the time, actually the nature wants you to unload and get well. But what happens, unless you take ownership, it keeps repeating itself. So therefore, if you want to follow non-violence, really, you cannot but look into this little bit. You must have some insight into your unconscious mind. Everybody has. Our teacher used to say, even if you haven't gone through any trauma, okay, your mom can just go out, right, when you really needed her and she went shopping, for example, and you can feel abandoned. the child needs mother or father and nobody is around. And what is the feeling? Abandonment. Actually, it's amazing because one of my friends, she told me that both her parents are doctors and they used to work really hard, and so from morning to night they used to go to work. So she was not at all subject to any abuse or anything at all. In fact, the parents really loved her. But she says, every morning I saw my parents leaving, I felt abandoned because both my parents are leaving me alone at home with a babysitter. And she says, even now I carry that hurt of abandonment even today. So that means it's nothing, right? What is it? Is there anything very traumatic? No. Even then people carry the burden. So imagine if there have been traumas, what is the extent of burden that we carry? And those, as a child, your mind is still very innocent, still at a very development stage. It's not an adult mind. Its capacity to cope is much less. And the impact of the event is much greater.
Just to one example, which is very classical, is Prince Charles.
Yes.
He actually, Diana was so beautiful, right? And everybody wonders why he fell for Camilla, right? So there was a whole psychology guy who did a research on that, and he found that during his childhood, his father and mother both were very busy. They never used to attend birthdays. They used to leave him constantly at home, and he felt very abandoned. He used to be taken care by the nanny. The nanny looks exactly like Camilla.
Oh my God.
Really? She actually felt back into her arms.
That's interesting. That's amazing, right? So that's so this is going to be my next story. So that is amazing. And so therefore, this non-violence, if you want to practice, you have to take ownership. Ownership for your own behaviors. Because if you don't, you'll always keep on attributing somewhere else and helplessly unload. So, certain amount of, see now many people ask me, but how many things I must be carrying from the childhood, and when will I go? Does it mean that I have to go and sit in front of a psychologist and spend 10 years, next 10 years trying to figure out what all I'm storing in my unconscious and unload all of that? Right? That's not what actually Vedanta doesn't say that. Vedanta says that bigger mix-up will take care of a lot of things. Right? When you take care of that bigger mix-up, a lot of things will fall in place. We have other methods to help yourself also. One of the things is, it's not even a method, it's the whole vision of Ishvara. It is brilliant. So that we still haven't discussed, and that is going to come in next couple of days. Ishvara. Right? So therefore, that you have to wait. But one thing is very, very important, that even if you don't go through some therapy and this and that, right, you don't have to wait. Whenever life is such, you will be presented with situations. You don't need to worry what all is buried inside. In any situation where your response is what? Not in proportion with what is, you know that there is some inner pressure which is making you to react like that. And that inner pressure generally, instead of denying, you need to take care. You need to look into it a little bit. There are two methods. Either you can go back to your childhood and see certain patterns which you will actually very easily find out. Because there are 2-3 things that you hold on, and that governs your whole psyche. And you can actually, if you pay attention to yourself, you can find it out. Okay? Second way is, nowadays this cognitive psychology has done amazing things. They said don't worry about what, going back to your childhood, finding out what are the traumas you've gone through and how you're carrying the impact of it. Whenever that whole big reaction occurs, you stay with that reaction and ask yourself this question: what are my assumptions? Before I react like this, what am I assuming? are these assumptions accurate or not? When you begin to stay with whatever you are feeling and give some time to those feelings without believing in them immediately, you will yourself find out, my God, I'm a great storyteller. I create such amazing stories out of simple facts. And when you begin to undo these stories and you begin to distinguish facts from stories, you will see how much load you can give up. Right? The facts, the story makes it blow it out of proportion. That part you need to cut out. Facts you can deal with. A lot of times people present me situations where they present the situation in a way that everything is helpless. I'm helpless. I'm in this situation and I can't do anything about it. There is no situation in which you can't do anything about it. There is no situation. That means you don't make use of your free will to help yourself. You put yourself in a helpless position and then you complain. Right? If the situation is so intolerant for you, not tolerable for you, you can always walk out. That choice you always have. Don't take out that choice as an option, right? Nobody has come here in this life to suffer perennially. Nobody has come. That much self-respect everybody must have. You have to exercise your free will. If it is so, and if you, before trying out all the different options, you just assume, oh, now it's unchangeable. Have you tried? Have you applied your mind to think about different options that are there? We generally think as though in two extremes. Either I'm totally passive or I blow up. I take whatever, or then one day it becomes a pressure cooker and I take it all out. But in between those two, there are infinite options which I don't explore. Every small intelligent intervention, right, will keep you in what mode? Not a helpless mode, but proactive mode. Every small act you can think about many different creative ways. You may not be able to change the situation overnight, but you can work towards that change. That process has to become, it's very, very important. Instead of outcome, when outcome doesn't come, we get disappointed because we want outcome tomorrow. But if we invest in the process, it puts us in which mindset? Helpless mindset or a proactive mindset? Proactive. And the minute you start applying yourself, right, what happens? The universe begins to help you too. Every action that you take, what? You will get help. Because you are helping yourself. Okay? So therefore, this I say, I don't accept, even if you can't do anything, you always can do one thing. And what is that? Prayer.
Yes.
You can always do that. Don't tell me you can't do anything. You can always do it. Ask for clarity. What should I do in this situation? I feel I'm stuck. But there is no human being who's ever totally stuck. Fine, help me find a way. Pray. If your intelligence is not doing the work, get the help from the universe by praying. Right? So therefore, this is something which is very important, that you use certain, unload all the stories that you are telling yourself. Story of helplessness, story of a victim, story of failure, story of no good, story of not being loved. All these have some truth, some data, and a lot of it's a build-up. And as long as you haven't corrected this story, you cannot what? Follow non-violence towards others and also towards yourself. If you really want to be non-violent, you have to. This is why our teacher says that you follow one value of non-violence, it's a complete value. Because if I really want to be non-violent, I have to have a certain mastery over myself. Otherwise, unconsciously, I'll end up hurting people. Okay? So therefore, getting healthy is so important. Because where is all this confusion? Where? In I or in the mind? In the mind. Right? Where do you need to undo this whole confusion? In the mind. I is always free, but you can't escape this work on the mind. You can't escape. Right? So that is ahimsa. The next one is shanti. Shanti is what we call accommodation. Okay. So what does this accommodation mean? There is this whole, people with whom we closely, one of the biggest problems in relationships is, especially when we relate closely to people, there is this whole tendency to control. You want your husband to behave exactly as you want. You want your kids to behave exactly as you want. You want your employees to behave exactly as you want. Right? So that is what we call a control issue. The more you love the person, the more you want to control the person and want that person to be exactly as you are. How reasonable is this thing of control? Imagine, a lot of people come to me and say, oh, my child is like this and like that and like this and like this. I said, now you imagine a child who tells you, when you tell the child get up, he'll get up. When you tell the child sit, he'll sit. When you tell the child eat, he'll eat. When you tell the child study, he'll go and study. What will you make that child?
A robot.
A robot. Completely person who is incapable of thinking. A person who is unable to make one's own decision. A person who is unable to deal with emotions. Because the person is a robot, just tells you, and this is your idea of an ideal child. An obedient child who does exactly as you tell. Or a spouse. Our teacher used to say, imagine you're married to somebody who will do exactly as you tell them all their life. He said, actually you'll get bored after 5 days. Now you're complaining that he doesn't do what I want, but actually after 5 days you'll say, what can, no spine only this person has. Has no opinion. Life becomes boring. Right? So therefore, sometimes our expectations are so unrealistic. Right? So that means, but if people are different, then what do I have to learn? Keeping those differences, I need to cooperate with them to get things accomplished. Because if the differences are going to create conflict, what am I going to do? Spoil everything. But if through the differences, and if I learn to cooperate, what I can do, because I don't have all the qualities. I have some qualities, the other person has some other qualities. And if I begin to use two qualities, instead of complaining about them not having some qualities that I want them to be, they want to have, then what will happen? I will really benefit. Because I am able to draw.
Complement.
Exactly. There is so much complementarity. But actually what happens is, many couples I have seen that one, let's say for example, I don't want to make a cliche, but one spouse is highly intelligent and the other one is very emotionally intelligent. One is cognitively intelligent and the other one is emotionally intelligent. Okay? So now, the emotionally intelligent person wants all the emotions to be understood, and then the other person is in some other analytical mode. So they find no match. And the intellect guy says, what is this person talking about all these emotions and this and that, and it loses interest. But actually, as Satish says, each one is meant to learn from the other. Because this person has actually excelled in analytical thing and needs to learn the emotional thing. The emotional person needs to learn to use that cognitive mind. Right? So that means two human beings are put together for a purpose. And the purpose is what? To draw from each other's strengths, learn and make it like really into a well-rounded thing. But what ends up happening? Both have conflict, both feel dissatisfied, both start living in their own world. Okay. Cooperation is what we call, when I accommodate the differences, I think about ways to cooperate. If I don't accommodate the differences, then it leads to conflict. Because I want that person to be exactly as I want. And the nature is such that there are no two identical people. Even the twins are not totally, they can't be always thinking about the same thing. No. Okay? So that means accommodation is differences don't threaten me. Because differences provide me an opportunity to learn. That is accommodation. Instead of trying the world to be the way I want it to be, what? Enjoy the differences and learn from the differences. That is real accommodation. Sometimes, as I told you, when there is another type of accommodation, which is, as I told you that, if you are carrying some hurt and then you do some kind of reflection and you transfer and you said, okay, now somebody in my home was responsible for that, then what happens? You begin to transfer the blame on that person. Before you didn't know, you were just getting angry or whatever. Now you know that because my mother did this to me or my father did this to me, therefore I'm getting angry. So what happens? There is some analysis, but there is transfer of blame. You begin to blame many times parents or somebody close to you or whatever. Right? Now accommodation means that you free yourself from this blame mode. Because the minute you start blaming, where are you carrying? The person is what the person is, but the blame is where? In your own mind. And it becomes your own burden. And a mind which is burdened with this blame is not a fresh mind to assess things accurately. Because it's already a loaded mind. So therefore, how do you free yourself? Let's say somebody did something to you which you found very difficult to handle. But how will you free yourself from the burden that you are carrying?
Forgive.
This forgive, you're right, absolutely. But we don't use the word forgive, we use the word accommodation. Forgiveness, what exactly is forgiveness? Can you explain?
Forgiveness can be, for example, my mother did XYZ in my childhood to me, abandoned me, and went to work. So, when I realized that I have heard about it, I tell myself that I would have liked her to be with me whenever I needed her. But possibly even she would have liked to be with me at that time, but due to her duties, she had to go. So now at this moment, if I carry that grudge, where is it going to take the relationship? And is that my goal?
See, this is an analysis. We don't call, this is perfect. What you are saying is absolutely right, but this is not what we call forgiving. This is analysis of re-understanding things.
Yeah, so
And
I forgive her.
so therefore, actually you release yourself from this resentment.
Yeah.
See, because forgiving means what you are this
Better person.
you are the better person, and then you are like what? Forgiving this person. Exactly. There is a certain amount of condescending. So what you're describing is exactly what I mean, but the word forgive has that little bit of condescending thing that I'm greater than thy and I know it better. Now you've done all these wrong things, but actually I forgive you. Accommodation is a much more kind of, you are putting yourself level. You're putting yourself and you're re-understanding things. You're seeing the situation from her standpoint and you're freeing yourself from what that hurt that you're carrying within yourself. That is accommodation. You understand the position of that other person, where that person is coming from, where that person, because before that what was happening, you're only looking at the situation from your own standpoint. Now, you begin to look at the situation from somebody else's standpoint and then you understand. And at times, you can understand that even if the person did something wrong, in this case it was, the mother was going to work, so the person did not actually do anything wrong. But imagine the mother told that you are, I didn't want you, for example. So it's not, the mother, there is certain responsibility for the mother to have done something which is inappropriate, but you can accommodate by saying that given her pressures, she could not have done better. If she could have done better, she would have done better. Okay? So therefore, there is certain law of cause and effect which is working in lives of everyone, which is helplessly making them as they are. So therefore, instead of carrying resentment, what do? You understand. You understand their behaviors, and then what? If you are in a position to talk to them and make them see things differently, you do. Otherwise, what do? At least you release yourself from what? This huge burden that you are carrying within yourself. So I see lots of hands up now.
Okay, he's raised the first one to raise the hand.
Okay.
After you analyze,
Yes.
you can forgive the other person and you can forgive yourself.
Excellent. So that means
that's
wonderful.
This level of
Excellent. Excellent. So that's why I don't want to please, I mean my teacher was very particular about this word, he was very particular about all the words. So forgive, if we can replace with accommodation, it's a nice word. It is a more neutral word where we are not like...
It's not so much weightage.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean the process she's describing is perfect, right? But the word is a little bit level where you don't put yourself up and the other person down. And you don't condemn the other person as, oh, this person did wrong. Because you've added your own story and one has to also take responsibility for that. Right?
Yeah, so the forgiveness, like I'm just extending. I also wanted to make the same point, but the extension here is that the same question of my mother did that to me, and after so many years I've understood and why she's done so, I have understood. Now what happens, the next step is, the regret which I have, that I have done for so many years, I have been fighting with her. That is it, so then you get into a guilt situation.
Yeah.
So therefore, you need to forgive yourself for that extension, and therefore you need to forgive. So it's actually not a up and down, because you're forgiving both.
Exactly. So that means, wonderful. You're accommodating the other person
As
and
well as
you're
you're
also
accommodating
accommodating
yourself.
yourself. Because you also may have reacted in so many ways because of the burden that you are carrying. This is, as I was telling you, when we carry things in our unconscious, our own behavior becomes all distorted. And we do things also in return. Absolutely. So it's taking responsibility and letting go on both sides. Very important. Wonderful. Thank you.
So it boils down to accepting self and others unconditionally.
Wonderful.
The way.
Now, unconditionally is something which I will again refine it slightly further, right? So that I will come back to through an example, right?
Yeah, I found out, or I saw in my life, this is a natural process when the children get self-children, yeah, and they experience all the trouble you have as a parent, and then it started, they got a new view and looked another way on their parents and say, hey, sorry, I thought it's wrong, and now I do the same thing. Yeah? I often said, I will do better than my parents. The same thing,
Yeah.
exactly.
When did I become my mother?
Yeah. Exactly.
And what Yuta is saying, I want to tell a story, and this is it, and that also then relates to what Savita is saying, that somebody asked our teacher, so how much do you accommodate? Do you accommodate unconditionally? And the answer was actually quite interesting, because what do you think a saintly answer is? What you accept everybody unconditionally. He said no. He said there is no relationship which comes without boundaries. Every relationship has boundaries. And I always wondered, what exactly does he mean by saying that every relationship has boundaries? Okay. And then one girl came to us, and then she started telling her story, which actually made me understand what he was talking about. Okay. So she told me that she was studying in the US, a young girl, okay, and she had a boyfriend, and her boyfriend used to physically abuse her, right? Used to beat her. And so I asked her, so I said, how long did you stay in this relationship? So she said, oh, I was with him for 3 years. So I said, what? You continued to be beaten up for 3 years? And she says, yes. So I said, why did you do that? So she said that, every time my boyfriend beat me up, after that he would start crying, and he would tell me that, my mother was beaten by my father, and that was such a traumatic childhood, and I'm suffering from that, and I'm really trying to help myself. But if you leave me, I will be so devastated, and I would commit suicide. So this poor girl, exactly, this poor girl felt like accommodating him, and took on her shoulder the whole responsibility of reforming this guy. And what happens? Do you think the guy, after apologizes and then he really tries to do something? The same thing repeated in 1 week, and then 1 week, then week after week. So that is, you cannot, and I said, oh my God, how true it is that you can't accommodate people unconditionally. In the name of accommodation, you cannot let yourself be abused. Very important. Right? So therefore, there are always boundaries. You have to stop. when you say stop, what happens? So now, then I said, so where did it end? So then he said, okay, one day he beat me up so badly I had to call the police. So what did she accomplish by accommodating him for 3 years? Nothing.
She was just suppressing something, but
Exactly.
it was all there.
Yeah. So that means if he really wanted to help himself, she doesn't have to be there. He needs help of a professional.
Exactly.
She has to send him to a professional if he's really serious about reforming. She doesn't have to take on the responsibility of reforming him. Right? Because it reaches a point, after a point, you and me can't do anything. When there are such distortions, the person needs professional help.
But sometimes there's that her own baggage she's carrying. She wants to be needed and she likes to be, So there's both
Her
ways,
need
the
to be
stories.
needed is very high.
High,
Absolutely.
exactly.
What?
Her
Her
need to be
need to be
needed. She
needed
also
is
needs to be.
very high.
That's why she's
So
stuck on
even
for
in
so
an
long.
extreme condition like that, you have to look at yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Even in
You have
an
to look up
extreme
to-
Yeah,
condition like that,
exactly.
you have to
You have to look at
yourself.
yourself, absolutely. Even in an extreme condition, because she made that choice, it's an active choice to stay back. Stay in that relationship. Even in that very
Because
good
it
name.
fulfilled her.
Absolutely. Sorry?
Because it fulfilled her in some way.
In
Her
some
needs
way
were
of
met.
that, I'm needed, I'm reforming somebody, I'm helping somebody, you see? And this is how this mind is an amazing thing. Right? In the name of accommodation and unconditional whatever, you just let yourself be abused. And this is why our teacher says, intelligent living is one has to be alert. And one constantly has to make decisions with clarity. And many times, the way we are conditioned by so many things which does not able us to see things clearly. And for that reason, every day you have to pray for clarity. One prayer you have to do every day is to ask for clarity. Because it's so tricky. There is no rule. Right? So therefore, accommodation also has its boundaries. Where is the boundary? Up to when do you accommodate?
It's individual.
The boundaries can be different, but if it conflicts with value of himsa, please understand. Right? Himsa towards yourself. You also have to have ahimsa towards yourself. Your accommodation is conflicting with what?
Your emotional
Your ahimsa. Your duty is also to protect yourself against violence. Okay. When two values come in conflict, which value takes over? All this is what we call intelligent living. Ahimsa takes over. You can't let people abuse you. A lot of times, even verbal abuse, people take like anything, but when he or she gets drunk, it just abuses. So you have to stop. A lot of times we don't say anything because we imagine, if I say then it will blow up and then, I don't want to create fight, so therefore let me not
Buy
say
the
anything.
peace at a cost.
When you not, that's a choice you make. Why? Because you project and you say, oh, because if I say something then all this will happen and I want to avoid it, so I don't do it. Have you solved the problem? Have you? No. It's all pent up. Then next time he will again do it, then more pent up. The third time again, because it's a no confrontation only. Easy. You are making that job very easy. No confrontation. You are giving a license. You become actually a passive accomplice. and then what happens? One day it just
Volcano.
blow up. Yeah, volcano. Have you done anything and that volcano leads to what? A huge fight. Which you were trying to avoid in the first place.
That time the trigger may be very small.
Exactly. At that point. With a small trigger, blew up. So you haven't actually avoided anything. What you were trying to avoid by not speaking up has ended up happening, but in
And
a
made it
much
worse.
bigger magnitude. Exactly, bigger magnitude. So therefore, speaking up, that don't underestimate the power of truth. And getting over that fear of, if I say, then you immediately project, then there'll be a divorce. If you don't speak, then the marriage will be saved, and if you speak up, then it'll be, what, there is nothing in between? A lot of the work is what? Your own, what? You have to deal with your own fears and your own insecurities and your own projections of postulating of, if I do this, then this will happen. And you just have to stay with the facts and you have to say what you have to say, and that's it. And at the most, what will happen? At the most, what will happen?
You stay alone.
At the most, you stay alone. Then what do you prefer? You want to be abused every day, or you want to stay alone in peace? So therefore, a lot of it is our own growth. It may seem like this person is, right, all the things which is so-called bad and you're all good. But how the fear belongs to you. Non-action belongs to you. Passivity belongs to you. That seems like no problem.
A lot of people who fear to be alone.
Exactly, that fear to be alone.
This is all packed under the title codependency, no? What we are talking about.
Sorry?
This is all packed under the title codependency, I would say.
Yeah. So therefore, this accommodation, when it comes in conflict, right, it's not unconditional. It is, when it comes in conflict with the other value, which is ahimsa or truth, then you have to stand up. You can't just let it go. Right? So that is accommodation. Then ahimsa, shanti, arjavam. Do we have time for 1 more? 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Arjavam is rujasya bhavaha. It is straight, the ruju is like a rope. And it is like how the rope, if you hold like this, how is it? Straight. Right? So straight, what does it mean? That you have to walk straight? Straightforward. Straightforward, what does it mean, straightforward?
Straight in the
Being
honest.
Being
Being honest.
Yeah.
So that means straightforwardness is defined as alignment between what you think is what you speak, and what you speak is what you do. 3 alignment.
Walk your talk.
Yes. You think, then when you speak, you don't what? Just, yesterday I love that example. You think one thing about somebody, but when that person is what? Not present, you start saying all these gossip things, and when the person is there, you're all friendly. Right? What you're thinking is one thing, and what you're speaking is something else.
Yeah.
And you're behaving and you're acting somewhere else. So that means there is no alignment. And this non-alignment can be so innocent sometimes. We don't even think about it. Right? We are so mechanical in our behaviors. We don't think about, that we don't even have enough mindfulness to see how am I really walking the talk. So I'll give you a simple example because I have only 5 minutes. So therefore, I'll give an example which is, when we just first moved to India, then some people would meet us in some social gathering and all. And they would all start saying, yeah, you must come home, you must come home. So Surya would always then wait for the invitation.
Anticipation.
And then the person is just, it's like an expression of being warm. They have no intention of calling you home or anything. And then Surya said, but they didn't even take our number, how did they? So that means such innocent things, right? I mean, it's no big deal. But we just say things which we don't mean. Okay? So therefore, making sure that I mean what I say and then I follow up with an action requires, you are a person who has that integrity, quiet integrity. You are not loose. Okay? Then the very presence of that person is changing. That's why then that dampitvam you don't need. When you embellish yourself with all these values, then you don't need to be not impressing others. People will automatically get impressed by you. Gandhiji didn't. He was wearing his dhoti, going to round table. He was least bothered of, if I don't wear suit, what they will think of me. What? Everybody stood up looking at him by what the strength of who he was. Right? Once you are in alignment, you have spent time on your personal growth. You don't need to be following the like a herd-like mentality. Okay? You can live with your own terms and people will start noticing you. Because there is an inherent strength. That strength is not a makeup, it's not Chanel makeup strength. It's a different type of strength. So with that, I will stop. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.